What is up, guys? Welcome to my spoiler review for Avengers Endgame. If you have not seen the movie, you should definitely click off right now, go watch it, and then come back, or in the meantime, watch my spoiler-free review, where I give a more basic, vague opinion about this movie. Even if you have seen the movie, you should probably check out my spoiler-free review just to know my basic opinions about the movie. For this video, I'll go over, like, basic plot points and moments in the movie, and talk about what I thought about those moments, not necessarily give my opinion about the movie as a whole. I might do that, I don't even know, because I obviously have not recorded this video. But again, if you have not seen the movie, you should not watch this video. But if you have, or you just don't care about spoilers, then let's get into my spoiler talk for Avengers Endgame. The movie begins with Hawkeye's family dying, which is a scene that I thought was a pretty awesome way to begin this movie. It was the perfect way to begin this movie, to focus on a character that actually was not in Infinity War at all, but plays a huge part in this movie nonetheless. This scene, which we knew was all coming, we all knew that Hawkeye's family was going to die, and it probably wasn't a spoiler. I could have just said this, I could have mentioned this in my spoiler-free review, but I think this actual scene just drags on for such a long time. It's got this eerie, ominous feeling. You don't know what's going to happen, or you do know what's going to happen, but you don't know when it's going to happen. And when it finally does, it hits pretty hard, and then it goes straight to the Marvel intro, where in that intro, which is something that I called right before I watched the movie, half the Avengers, obviously the ones that were snapped out of existence in Infinity War, are not in the intro, which I thought was a nice detail and a nice touch that they probably had to add in this intro, otherwise people would probably say something. But then that leads right into Tony and Nebula being stranded in space. There were some nice moments, like Tony and Nebula playing paper football, as well as Tony talking to the Iron Man mask, which that was like the main focus of one of the trailers. That was like one of the only things we knew about this movie. I mean, the trailers gave away absolutely nothing about this movie. It was really just the first act of the movie, which is probably the worst act of the movie, which it's still a great act, but it's insane how much they left out of the trailers and how much they could have put in the trailers. But I'm glad that they didn't, because we all went into this movie basically completely blind, and that led to a much better experience in the end. But then they were saved by Captain Marvel in a scene that kind of showcases how they are using Captain Marvel in this movie, because she's in this scene, and this is like the only thing she does in this movie until the end. And I like that, because Captain Marvel, there was a sneaking suspicion, and a lot of people were scared, including myself, that Captain Marvel would be like this god character who would just swoop in and defeat Thanos, and everything would be good in the end because of this one character, which would feel very unsatisfying for the Infinity Saga, as they're calling it, because she was literally just introduced, and Iron Man and Captain America have always been the focus, as well as Thor, of this Infinity Saga. So I am actually glad how they used her. She was in the beginning, she was in the end, but nothing at all in between. And when she did appear, it's not like she did everything and nobody else did anything. And I think that they used Captain Marvel very, very, very well in this movie, or they used Captain Marvel the perfect amount without it feeling like she was doing something where nobody else was doing anything. So Captain Marvel saving Tony and Nebula, which fits into the end credit scene of Captain Marvel, as well as she probably went to Earth, and Rocket probably told Captain Marvel about Tony and Nebula, or the spaceship in space, so Captain Marvel went there to save them, and that led to this movie. So I'm glad. I really like how they all did that. But then with Captain Marvel, the Avengers decide to just go and take on Thanos, which is a moment that this moment right here, where they go to take on Thanos and he's basically half dead, and then they easily kill him, was an insane moment that I did not see coming. This is a moment that completely threw the whole movie for a loop, because I knew that the plot was going to have some time travel involved, and there was going to be a 5-year jump to things that were basically spoiled in the talk about this movie before it came out, like a while before it came out. But I had no idea that they'd be killing the main villain off, 15 minutes into the movie. It was an insane moment that I definitely did not see coming, and it just jumped right into 5 years later, where it seems like the world is coping with the deaths of half of the world, and obviously other worlds are doing so too. But I think that the way they expressed how broken these people are, especially like Black Widow and Captain America, I think they did a great great job at that, especially like Captain Black Widow dealing with the fact that not only is the half the world gone, but also Hawkeye or Ronin at this point has completely lost it, which I thought was a good plot point as well. But that obviously leads straight into Scott being released by a rat, which is probably the luckiest moment in the MCU history, that probably like the key to solve to all of this, which is Ant-Man in the Quantum Realm, was released by a random rat from the Quantum Realm 5 hours after he was in there, or 5 years for everybody else. So it's a very, very lucky moment, but it's a funny moment nonetheless, and a moment that I think is not entirely unplausible. It's definitely something that could happen, especially since it took 5 years. I think it's definitely possible, and it doesn't bother me all too much. It is, however, still like one of the luckiest moments in this universe, like ever in any of the movies, but this is the beginning of what they call the time heist. In this part of the movie, Ant-Man, Captain America, and Black Widow all bring the band back together. They go get Hulk, who is now Professor Hulk, who is definitely not the best version of Hulk, although I will say he's better than how he was in Infinity War, and also better than how he was in Ragnarok, in my opinion. But I do think that the best Hulk is the Avengers and Age of Ultron Hulk, who did appear in this movie briefly in the Avengers part of the time heist, who I obviously will talk about, or I'll talk about that part of the time heist as well as the rest of the time heist. But I just want the Hulk to be that rampaging monster that we saw in the Avengers, because that is just the most fun and most badass version of Hulk. But at least this Professor Hulk is better than what we saw in Infinity War, as well as what we saw in the beginning of this movie as well. But they go get Thor as well, who is now Fat Thor, who is also not the best version of Thor, but at least he's better than how he was before Ragnarok, and he's definitely very, very funny, and also he's pretty badass at the end of this movie, especially, which again, I'll talk about that at the end of this review. They also try to get Tony, but he refuses because he has a daughter, which I thought was a great way to bring some more emotional weight to the fact that he dies later in the movie, and there's also some more foreshadowing and setup for that death, and I'll obviously talk about that death at the end of this video. Again, I'll talk about a lot of things. There's a lot of things to talk about. But I also like how Pepper convinced Tony to ultimately help the Avengers. I thought it really fit his character, and that led to all of the Avengers going on this time heist, where they get this awesome new costumes, or these awesome new costumes that I'm really glad they don't wear as much as I expected them to, because although they look really cool, they are very uniformed, and they make the Avengers look a lot less unique from each other than they should. So I'm glad they only wore them when they were time traveling, and wore their regular suits or variations of their suits throughout the entirety or the rest of their scenes, and I'm glad they did that. But let's talk about this time heist, which I thought was a genius way to conclude the 11 years of build-up to this to Avengers Endgame, the Infinity Saga, pay tribute to the 11 years of build-up that they've had, where they go to the Avengers, they go to Thor the Dark World, and they go to Guardians of the Galaxy. The main one that I liked the most was the Avengers, because, I mean, like they said, there are 3 stones in New York, which, if you think about it, these cosmic, the most powerful things in the universe, they're all in this one city of this pretty small planet in the universe. It is pretty insane to think about, but obviously that is what happened. It's a pretty crazy coincidence, but I think it does definitely make a lot of sense, because, I mean, we've never thought about it before, but that is true, and it always has been true in the past. But this time heist with Tony, Scott, and Captain America, as well as Hulk, going back to the Avengers. You have Rhodey and Nebula going to the Guardians of the Galaxy right at the beginning. You have Nat and Hawkeye going to Vormir, which is kind of paying tribute to Infinity War, as well as Thor and Rocket Raccoon going to the scenes right before Thor's mother dies in Thor the Dark World. I thought all of this was a genius way to pay tribute to the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole, as well as lead up to how Thanos will get back into the present day, considering he is now dead in the present day. I also really love the way they built up the continuity of this universe. I loved how they continued, or they expanded the continuity of especially the Avengers. They showed, like, right after they defeated and apprehended Loki, they showed or explained why Loki was wearing that strap on his mouth, and they also showed, like, all the extra characters who should have been there because of later movies that explained that they were probably there, and now they are there, like Robert Redford's character from The Winter Soldier, or the Hydra SHIELD agents from The Winter Soldier as well. as well as the fact that the Ancient One, probably the rest of the Mystic Arts people, were there defending New York, which is an insanely awesome retcon in my opinion. I just love all the continuity building and the continuity expansion of especially the Avengers, but I also again love the tribute to the Avengers and the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, as well as Thor: The Dark World. I think these time travel or time heist scenes did an incredible job at what they were trying to do, but I'll talk about each one of them individually. So, Ant-Man, Iron Man, Captain America, and the Hulk all go back to the Avengers to get 3 separate Infinity Stones. Hulk goes to get the Time Stone, which is being held by the Ancient One, which I thought was an awesome storyline, an awesome bunch of scenes, where not only does it explain Doctor Strange's plan back in Infinity Stone, or it builds upon that, where the Ancient One, who also, again, an awesome retcon into the Battle of New York, but also the fact that she knew about Doctor Strange, who was going to be the Sorcerer Supreme in 5 years. I love that retcon as well. It also confirms what year Doctor Strange the movie takes place in, which I guess is 2017, but I do really like this retcon. I also like how it explains a little bit of Doctor Strange's overall plan before, when he gave up the Time Stone to Thanos in Infinity War and said this was the only way, and we're in the Endgame now. I mean, just the look on the Ancient One's face when the Hulk mentioned that Doctor Strange just gave it up willingly, gave the Time Stone up willingly to Thanos, the look on her face was so telling to what Doctor Strange's plan was, and I loved all of that. I loved how they brought that all together with the Ancient One, and again, probably the best retcon in the MCU history. The Ancient One was there in the Battle of New York, and I just love that. But then there's also Iron Man and Ant-Man try to get the Tesseract in the least successful time heist in this movie. It's a lot of fun. All the time heists are very, very fun. Some of them are very touching as well, but this one is pure comedy, and it also does a lot of great retcons, like I mentioned earlier, as well. But there's a lot of funny moments and a lot of great moments, and a lot of one scary moment as well, when Iron Man or Tony Stark is just walking with the Tesseract, and Hulk just busts out of the staircase. And first of all, the staircase joke is hilarious, and the Hulk is hilarious in this movie as well, like especially the one, or also the one from the Avengers, the old one. But I do think that this moment was genuinely scary. Like, that was a moment, like a jump scare, one of the greatest jump scares I've ever seen, because it's a movie that you don't expect to have horror, but that moment was definitely very, very scary. But I do think that storyline in general, or that time heist, the part of that time heist, was mostly just comedy. But then there's also the one with Captain America where he goes up against himself, which is awesome to see. I love all the callbacks, all the lines. This is also one thing about this movie that I love. All the callbacks to previous movies. It's certainly fan service at times, fan servicey at times, but I don't really care. I love it. Then there's Thor and Rocket going to 2013 on Asgard to get the Reality Stone. Watching the movie, Thor didn't really need to be there. I mean, Rocket could have easily done it by himself watching the scenes, but this did serve for one of the best reunions in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because two characters who I don't think had nearly enough screen time together, which is Thor and his mother. When she died in Thor: The Dark World, it did not hit at all. It was not emotional in the slightest, but after watching this movie, and they have more than 2 lines together, and they really bond over the course of these scenes, I bet if you watch this movie and then Thor: The Dark World, it would be so much more emotional. I heard somewhere that she had like more than double the lines she had in the previous 2 movies she's appeared in this movie, which I thought was awesome. I love those scenes, and it's not the only one, not the only scenes in this movie where a hero bonds with his currently deceased parent, because Tony does that too. Because of the fact that Tony and Scott completely failed at getting the Tesseract, Captain America and Iron Man decide to go back to the 1970s, where they know that Hank Pym is there so they can get more Pym particles, because they only have 1 trip left, and they can't go back to the present day without the Tesseract, because that would mean that it was all for nothing, especially one of the deaths, or the death, which I will talk about as well. But Iron Man and Captain America go to the 1970s, which leads to a lot of great moments that I do think was definitely very necessary. Like, they didn't necessarily need to do the whole thing where they don't get the Tesseract, but I think I'm glad they did, because this means that, one, Captain America gets his kind of reunion with Peggy Carter a little bit, and also Iron Man bonds with his father in a way that he's never done before, very similarly to Thor, and now he understands his father very much more, and it really resolves all that conflict, and I really like that. A lot of touching moments and a lot of great moments in those scenes, a lot of great acting as well. But then there's the 4 characters who go to 2014 during the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, right where Star-Lord is on Morag, I'm pretty sure they called it, and they're getting is getting the Power Stone. Nebula and War Machine get the Power Stone, and a couple scenes that didn't necessarily need 2 characters, but at the same time, the Avengers did not necessarily know what they were getting into, so I guess they were just taking 2 characters to Asgard and to Morag for just backup. But I mean, if Nebula didn't go to Morag or to 2014 at all, or in the time travel at all, then there would be absolutely no conflict in the 3rd act, which I am glad that she did, because that 3rd act is incredible, and I'll talk about that obviously later. But I do think that the Morag scenes was good. It was pretty funny when they knocked out Star-Lord and they called him an idiot, but those were not the highlight of the time heist, although those scenes were the way that they incorporated Thanos into the ending of this movie in a way that I thought was pretty genius in how they used the time travel there. But then there's also Black Widow and Hawkeye going to get the Soul Stone. It's very lucky that they chose 2 people who deeply care about each other to go get the Soul Stone, because if Rhodey and Nebula went to get the Soul Stone, that would not have worked. But Black Widow and Hawkeye go get the Soul Stone, which means that one of them is going to die. And after a couple scenes where these 2 characters of Black Widow and Hawkeye, or Natasha Romanoff and Clint Barton, just try to kill themselves just to save the other, which is a pretty awesome emotional scene if you ask me, ends up that Black Widow is the one to die, which is the first time in this movie that I cried a little, and I did not expect to cry for the death of Black Widow because I've never loved her as a character, but I think over the course of the last couple movies, ever since like the Winter Soldier and then Civil War and then Infinity War and especially Endgame as well, she has become a lot more realized as a character. Like, she wasn't great in Iron Man 2, she was fine, but then in the Avengers and Age of Ultron, I didn't really like her, but in the Russo movies, I think she shines really, really brightly, and in this movie, I thought that Scarlett Johansson did a great job in the role, to the point where, especially because of the music in the background, when she died in this moment, I cried, although not nearly as much as how much I cried at the end. But that is basically the entirety of the time heist. I thought it was a great tribute to the movies, a great retcon with certain retcons, and as well, on top of that, a great way to bring Thanos into the ending, but also a great emotional death scene on top of that, so just to make it not only just so they're going back to get these stones, but also that it had a heavy price as well. But this right here, once all the Avengers come back from time travel, they talk about Black Widow for a little bit. I think this is the beginning of the 3rd act, or the last like 40 minutes of the movie, and like I said in my spoiler-free review, the last 40 minutes of this movie, or the 3rd act, or whatever, I don't know how many hours or minutes it is, because this is a 3-hour movie, so I would think that the 3rd act would be an hour, but I don't think it's a whole hour. But I do think that this last 3rd act of the movie is a complete and utter masterpiece. It is by itself the greatest superhero movie of all time, but it's also helped by the first 2 acts as well, which are also pretty incredible. So they all come back with the Infinity Stones. Hulk gets all the Infinity Stones, and he decides that he's the only one who can do it without dying or getting severely injured. I think Thor can do it as well, but exactly like Tony said, he's not exactly in the greatest shape, mentally or physically, so Hulk doing it made a lot of sense, and he snapped his fingers, and everybody came back to life in a moment that was also pretty awesome. But that was not the best moment of the 3rd act. That was a pretty awesome moment. That was like the whole time after that I was thinking, wait, so the rest of the Avengers are going to come back, right? I mean, the Avengers came back later and I expected it, but that did not take away from how awesome it was in the end. I'll talk about that in a second, but right after everybody comes back to life, Thanos attacks the Avengers. The entire destruction of the Avengers base was a pretty intense moment where I genuinely thought characters like Ant-Man or Hawkeye might die, as like Ant-Man just got exploded and his face was there. It's not like he was covered up by his mask. None of them died from this whole explosion, which I'm glad they didn't because of what came right after. But I do think this was a pretty intense moment nonetheless. Hawkeye is just facing off against all these, I don't remember their names, I think they're Night Riders or something from Infinity War, in another horror scene kind of where it's very dark and all these monsters are coming at him. He seems pretty badass, where he's taking out these people and holding the Infinity Gauntlet at the same time with all of the Infinity Stones. I didn't say this, but Hawkeye is definitely at his best in this movie. This is easily his best movie yet. He's never been the most badass character. He's never been the worst character either, in my opinion, but he's never been a character that shined as much as he has in this movie. And it seems like basically every Avenger, except for like maybe Hulk and Thor, definitely this is like their best movies. Captain America, Iron Man, Black Widow, Hawkeye, this is all their best movie, and it really shows. But then after Thanos attacks the Avengers base, the main three, which is Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor. Thor has his hammer and his axe, which is a pretty awesome moment when he gets them. Iron Man's also going all out on Thanos. They're obviously getting beaten. Obviously, I think Thor could beat Thanos pretty easily, like in Infinity War, by himself, even with the Infinity Stones, but this is a way less powerful Thor, I guess. I don't really think they explained that part of it, how Thanos was so much more powerful now compared to how he was in Infinity War, even though he didn't have Infinity Stones. It's like against Thor. But then Captain America uses or wields Thor's hammer, which is one of the most hype moments in cinematic history. This is something that I also expected to happen in this movie, and right before it did, I was like telling my friend he's about to pick up Mjolnir, but he did it, and it's such an awesome, satisfying moment, and then he just beats up Thanos for like 2 minutes straight. It's just so incredibly awesome to watch, with Thor in the background screaming. I knew it because of the events of the party at the beginning of Avengers Age of Ultron. I loved all of this. It was so incredible to watch, but I also don't think that was the greatest moment in this masterpiece of a third act. Because right then and there, after Captain America does get a upper hand on Thanos, Thanos gets back at him pretty easily, where he punches him to the ground, completely destroys his shield in some pretty intense punches, very similar to how he was punching Iron Man in Infinity War, where you can feel the punches coming, and you feel how hard they might be. Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man are all down, and it all seems lost, with Thanos bringing together all of his troops, these like thousands and thousands of these alien creatures, going up against just Captain America by himself in this incredibly beautiful shot where you see Thanos as well as this entire army and just Captain America by himself standing up against him, and obviously all is lost, but this is such an awesome shot for Captain America where Iron Man and Thor are down as well, but Captain America is going up by himself. He's prepared to go up against this army by himself. And then you hear Falcon in Captain America's ear saying, "On your left," and this right here, this moment was easily the greatest moment in cinematic history. This moment, I was so goddamn hyped. From this moment all the way to the end of this battle, I could not take the smile off of my face. Actually, from when Captain America takes Mjolnir until the end of this battle, the smile on my face was just not going away. It was so awesome to watch, because then a portal opens, you see Black Panther. It focuses on Black Panther quite a lot, as well as his sister and his mother. Then Falcon flies out, and then Scarlet Witch flies out as well. Winter Soldier runs in, and then you have another portal opening up with the people on Titan, like Drax and Star-Lord and Doctor Strange and Mantis, as well as Spider-Man. The camera focuses on Spider-Man, and everybody in the theater cheers, and the rest of the scene where you see just a crap ton of Doctor Strange portals opening up, and all of these superheroes, as well as the Wakandan army, Sangi Bombay, and all of the sorcerers from the Mystic Arts, or whatever you call them. You have all these superheroes coming together, these characters that we genuinely care about over the course of these 11 years and 22 movies. There's like hundreds and hundreds of characters, where it's really just like 50 main characters, but then also like a crap ton of soldiers from these armies. But the main characters that we focus on, the main characters, the superheroes that we've grown to love over the course of these movies, it makes this moment so satisfying. It makes this moment so incredibly epic. I think the best word to describe this moment is epic, where right after Hulk snapped everyone back to existence, I was wondering if all these characters are going to return in this movie, and when they finally did, I was never happier watching a movie than I was in this moment. And then they all come together in this awesome superhero pose, and Captain America says the words, "Avengers assemble," and it's gotta be the most epic moment in cinematic history, which leads to the greatest battle in cinematic history as well, where the Avengers, this crap ton of heroes, and the armies of the Wakandan army and the Mystic Arts characters, or I'm pretty sure there's a lot of other armies as well, they all go up against Thanos and his forces in, again, what's got to be the greatest battle in cinematic history. You have Giant Man. The most memorable moment in this battle for me is when you see Giant Man just punch an entire Chitauri warship that Hulk also did in the Avengers. It's such an awesome moment where you just see that in the background, and just in that moment it really looked like an entire comic book where these crap ton of heroes are fighting this crap ton of villains. It's such an epic moment. All of these other heroes, most of them get time to shine, and the fact that Captain Marvel isn't there, especially like for the most part, Definitely helps the fact that she doesn't overshine the rest of the Avengers, but I think mostly everybody gets a great moment. You also have a moment between Iron Man and Spider-Man, which is really nice. A moment between Star-Lord and Gamora. You have these slight, small moments where you give these characters time to breathe. It's just too epic to describe in words. I was so excited, so hyped watching this for not only the first but also the second time, and I'm going to watch it a third as well and probably get equally as hyped because it is just so incredibly epic. And even when Captain Marvel shows up, I was genuinely excited when she did. It was such an awesome moment as well, where Thanos' ships are all firing down. It seems like there are a lot of characters are about to die from these shots, but then they stop and they go up to the sky and they're shooting at what is obviously Captain Marvel, and then she just destroys the entire ship. It's an awesome moment, I'm not going to lie. Even though Captain Marvel is not my favorite character, and she's a very controversial character as well as especially the actress, I thought this was definitely a great moment for the character. And again, I love the way the amount of time they used her in this movie was, in my opinion, pretty perfect. But now here you have Thanos trying to get the Infinity Gauntlet. You also have Nebula in the background. I didn't talk about this, but the conflict of the old Nebula and the new Nebula, or the future Nebula, as well as Gamora herself, was very well done in my opinion, and the old Nebula is now dead. But you have Thanos trying to get the Infinity Gauntlet and the Infinity Stones, and he actually does succeed in doing that in the end, but Captain Marvel is trying to stop him, but she isn't able to because of the Power Stone punch, which is such an awesome moment. You have Iron Man trying to do so, and a couple other characters trying to stop Thanos from using the Infinity Gauntlet, but then Doctor Strange has this moment where he says, he picks up his finger, basically signifying that this is the one they're going to win. Awesome moment as well. Iron Man goes up against Thanos, takes the Infinity Stones right before Thanos snaps his fingers. It doesn't work, and now Iron Man has the Infinity Stones. He says, "I am Iron Man," right after Thanos says, "I am inevitable," and that's such an awesome line, "I am Iron Man," because that is the line that basically started this universe. It is the final line in Iron Man, and it's a line that's been repeated by Tony Stark so much over the course of these years that it makes sense that it is basically his final line in this universe, "I am Iron Man," because he snaps his fingers and they win. Thanos sits down just like he did in Infinity War. He dies. He gets snapped out of existence just like he did to the Avengers, or his future self did to the Avengers. Thanos' forces are dead, they're all gone, the Avengers win, but obviously it's a bittersweet moment because Iron Man dies. And holy shit, I thought that Spider-Man's death was like the saddest death I've ever seen in Infinity War, but they just upped it. They upped the ante in every single way in Endgame compared to Infinity War, that it's just mind-boggling how they did that. But the death scene here for Iron Man, I cried for Black Widow, so obviously I was going to cry for Iron Man, but I didn't think it would be this much. I was completely bawling. It might have been the saddest death scene I've ever seen ever. I mean, Spider-Man was as well, or at least one of, but I think Iron Man takes the cake for the saddest death scene in cinematic history from what I've seen, because this is a character that we've gone to love over the course. I'm pretty sure this is his 9th movie, not including cameos. So including cameos, this might be his 10th movie in 11 years of movies and 21 movies of building up to this moment of Iron Man dying, the character that created this universe, the character that is one of, if not the most beloved character in this universe, right next to Captain America and now I guess Thor and kind of Thanos as well. But Iron Man dies in this moment, and it's so goddamn emotional. I was crying, the entire theater was crying, everybody was crying at this moment. It's so sad. Not only this moment where he dies when Spider-Man is there and Pepper is there, and also his funeral later. I mean, I cried during his funeral when the camera was focusing on all these different heroes at his funeral and the music in the background. I cried several times during this death scene, during this death as a whole, and I think it was such an emotional and beautiful ending to this character, as well as a great self-sacrifice, proving Captain America wrong of what he said in the Avengers, that Iron Man is not the one to sacrifice himself for everybody else. Turns out Cap was wrong, thankfully, and Iron Man sacrificed himself to save his daughter, as well as his the entirety of the world and the rest of the Avengers as well, in a incredibly emotional and satisfying ending to this character, as well as the Infinity Saga. Speaking of satisfying endings, we all knew that this was going to be Captain America's last movie, but I don't think a lot of us expected that he would not die and that Iron Man would. I expected the opposite, for Captain America to die and Iron Man to retire, but it turns out Iron Man died and Captain America essentially retired. He went back to the 1940s and stayed there, which is such an incredibly satisfying ending for this character. He stayed in the 1940s in a different timeline. I'm pretty sure the way they explain the fact that he's back in the present day as an old man is that he went to the 1940s, that's a different timeline, and he still had this time travel device on him. So once he was old and decided that he probably needed to come back to tell the Avengers what happened to him, he went back to the original timeline he was from. He time traveled there, and now he's an old man. Maybe Peggy died in his timeline, so he has nothing back there, or maybe he has kids. I don't know, but either way, I think this is an incredibly satisfying ending to this character. And considering Iron Man died, they couldn't really kill off both of them, so I'm glad that they didn't. And also the fact that he handed off the Captain America mantle to Falcon was, although it would have been better if it was Bucky, also a very emotional and satisfying moment for the character as well. But that's essentially right there and then the ending of not only the Avengers Endgame movie, but also the entirety of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's Infinity Saga. 22 years, 22 movies, 11 years, 3 phases, 1 saga, 1 Infinity, 22 movies, 11 years, 3 phases, and 1 saga of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and they culminated with Avengers Endgame incredibly well. They did it perfectly, and I have absolutely no problems with this movie. I think it's hilarious. I think the comedy really lands. The action is insanely epic, and not even only the action, just these small moments of either fan service or tie-ins to the comics, or just epic moments in general, as well as the emotion in this movie. The acting's really good. The villain also, Thanos, he is definitely the best villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, although he was done better in Infinity War. That is not a bad thing, as that movie was more focused on him, while this movie was more focused on the Avengers, or more focused on the Avengers that survived Infinity War. But I think that this movie was practically perfect. I don't really have many problems with it. The ones that I do are incredibly minor, like it's way too short. I think this movie should have been like at least 4.5 hours, but all seriousness, I think this movie is perfect, and all of that are the reasons why I think Avengers Endgame is my favorite movie of all time, and that means that I think it's also the best movie of all time as well. But anyway, this is a very long video, so let me know all your thoughts about this movie in the comments down below. What did you love about it? What did you hate about it? I hope you hated nothing about it like I did, because I don't really have many complaints about this movie at all, except for the fact that it was 3 hours long, which is way too short. But all joking aside, I don't really have any complaints about this movie, so let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.